Thank you. Thank you, comrades. Comrade National Chairperson of the ANC, the Western Cape Chairperson, Comrade Marius Fransman, and leadership of the province of the Western Cape, members of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, leadership of the Tripartite Alliance present here, political parties represented in Parliament who are with us here today, the Makgatho family, traditional leaders, religious leaders, academia, business community, civil society, the diplomatic corps, veterans of our struggle, members of National Parliament and members of the legislature, viewers and listeners at home, comrades and friends, fellow South Africans. Firstly, let me indicate, compatriots, that as we celebrate our centenary of the African National Congress, we decided we will celebrate the whole of 2012, doing a number of things. At the same time, we are also celebrating 50 years of Umkhonto weSizwe during the same year. Certainly, there are many things we will do as part of our celebrations to remember where we come from. We have gone through difficulties and political setbacks, but we have also succeeded and made progress in our struggle. Among other things we decided to do was to celebrate our leaders, those who had become presidents of the African National Congress, but also celebrate other leaders who could have been members of the or presidents of the ANC, but they were not. But they were as powerful, important as anyone. Those celebrations and discussions about them will be taking place, and therefore the decision taken to have lectures about the presidents on those specific day, we celebrate the lives and times of the president. We do not deal with all other issues. And we have given the first lecture of the first president, John Langalibalele Dube. Today, it is the second lecture on the second president of the African National Congress, President Makgatho. I just thought I should clarify that because it is important to know that that's how we have shaped our celebrations. We are very happy that the family of our president was able to join us today. Thank you for joining us for this lecture on the second President General of the ANC, forming part of our celebration of the centenary of our glorious movement. We are honored to discuss the life and times of President Sefako Makgatho, a gallant fighter who led the South African Native National Congress from 1917 to 1924. It is a fitting tribute to hold this lecture in the Western Cape, as President Makgatho gave his important and first address in the Cape on the 6th May 1919. It was at that annual conference that President Makgatho uttered his immortal words, saying, and I quote, "We ask for no special favors from government. This is the land of our fathers," unquote. A renowned teacher, Methodist lay preacher, journalist, state agent, unionist, and a celebrated political leader, President Makgatho was born at Kampahlele in the Pietersburg district in the northern Transvaal, now Limpopo province, in 1861. He was the son of Chief Harutle Josiah Makgatho under the paramountcy of the legendary Kgosi Sekhukhune of the Bapedi Kingdom that fought fearlessly against the Transvaal Boers. President Makgatho attended school in Pretoria and later went to study education and theology in Middlesex, England. He became a teacher for 20 years at the Kilnerton Training Institute in Pretoria, a school that produced prominent South Africans such as Joan Nhlanhla, Miriam Makeba, Lillian Ngoyi, Ntato Montlane, and others. A dedicated activist and human rights campaigner, he was instrumental in the establishment of the Transvaal African Teachers Association in 1906. President Makgatho was also a keen media activist and helped establish a newspaper called The Native Advocate, co-owned with Advocate Alfred Mangena. It folded after 2 years due to lack of funds. He also founded The Good Shepherd as the journal for the Transvaal Africa Teachers Association. President Makgatho also formed one of the earliest black political organizations, the African Political Union, which later changed its name to the Transvaal Native Congress. President Makgatho remained president of this organization from 1906 until 1908. The TNC later joined the South African Native National Congress when it was formed in 1912 in Bloemfontein, Mangaung, becoming its Transvaal branch. President Makgatho was therefore active in the ANC since its inception in 1912. 3 people had been in the running for founding president at the Bloemfontein inaugural conference of the ANC. John Dube, in absentia, Edward Tseu, and Sefako Makgatho. There were 3 nominees who stood for elections in the very first conference of the ANC, emphasizing that democratic understanding of this movement that was being born. Comrade Makgatho, at the time, asked the Transvaal Native Congress to vote for Comrade Dube to promote unity. President Makgatho was among the 4 vice presidents that were elected, others being Alfred Mangena, Meshach Pelham, and Walter Khobusan. But what is important to appreciate with our President Makgatho was his sense of unity of the oppressed people. Much as Transvaal branch at the time was the biggest in terms of the size, he could have been elected. But he decided to say his branch, the Transvaal one, the province, must vote for John Langalibalele Dube because his focus was on the unity of the oppressed at the time. As you'd know, he had been active for a long time before this time. Thus, he was a leader of that organization that became part of the African Native National Congress. The election outcome indicates that from its founding Congress, the ANC already emphasized unity and that it already had many leaders to choose from, all who were equally capable, all of them, not just these 3. Many of the men and women who were there, very capable. What is remarkable about the founding Congress as well is that it indicated that the ANC was Pan-African in outlook from inception, looking for solutions to the problems of the continent over and above domestic challenges that we were faced with. President Makgatho outlined his vision in 1919 as follows, and I quote, "The ANC aims to unite Africans not just in South Africa, but also in Lesotho, Botswana, and Swaziland in particular," unquote. Compatriots, all ANC presidential terms have proven to be difficult because every period has its own unique challenges throughout the 100 years. But President Makgatho, like President Dube, led the organization during the formative years while it was still finding its feet and focus. It was also the period when oppression was deepening, which required a formidable response from the organization. The organization had to respond to the aggression of the white regime, which was riding roughshod on the human rights of the African people, and to take away as much of their land as possible. Fortunately, in President Makgatho, the ANC had a man who led from the front. While he acted collectively with the masses, he also earned his stripes as a bold leader in his own right. Earlier in 1912, he protested actively against the color bar, the racial segregation that preceded apartheid. To highlight racism in the railways, he boarded a train coach reserved for white people only and was attacked by a white passenger, J.P. Volmarant. In other words, when Volmarant saw this black man in the coach, he couldn't hold himself. He attacked him. In court, President Makgatho admitted that he deliberately provoked a confrontation on the coach in order to draw attention to the genuine African grievances against the racism of South African railways. The racist regime spent £200,000 afterwards on blacks-only coaches to stop the African people from using the exclusively white coaches so as to further strengthen racism. President Makgatho also led successful what was called the Pavement struggle in Pretoria. According to one of the many bizarre discriminatory practices of the time, Africans were not allowed to walk on street pavements in some towns, including Pretoria. You had to walk where the cars were. The pavements was for white people by law. Not in every town and city, in some. On numerous occasions, President Makgatho also used the law courts to challenge ordinances that affected the movement of Africans in Johannesburg. He won a number of such lawsuits. President Makgatho also led a struggle to assist the Indian community, whom the Pretoria local authorities sought to deny facilities at the local market. His determination, bravery, and courage so impressed former President Nelson Mandela that he named his son Makgatho after him. In his book, Long Walk to Freedom, President Mandela described President Makgatho as an emblem of domitability and courage. In addition to the protest actions, President Makgatho also engaged the white supremacists directly. As he outlined in his 1919 political report, he attended meetings at the union buildings in Pretoria and other offices, talking to the secular regimes, ministers, and officials about the impact of their racist policies on the African people. Out of all racist laws that the ANC was fighting at that time, nothing was as shocking, aggressive as the Native Land Act of 1913, later amended in 1936. The law confronted the ANC leadership just few months after the formation of the organization. The law was crafted in response to the demands of white farmers in the Cape Province, the Transvaal, and the Free State. Its aim was to destroy and dismember a successful African peasantry who, despite numerous political difficulties, offered effective competition to white farmers. The law prohibited Africans from owning or tilling land in any part of the country outside the so-called native reserves, which at the time accounted for less than 10% of the land area of South Africa. The effect of the law was the dispossession of the African people of the few pieces of their ancestral land that they still owned and controlled. Founding ANC Secretary General Sol Plaatje, writing in his book Native Life in South Africa, eloquently outlined the impact of the act. And I quote, "Awaking on Friday morning, June 20, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth," unquote. In 1914, the leadership sent a delegation of 5 led by President John Langalibalele Dube to the British Crown to ask them to withhold the royal assent to the law. Many other deputations followed to the British Crown, but did not yield any fruit. Responding to debates within the movement about the effectiveness of or lack thereof of the deputation strategy, President Makgatho reacted. I cannot understand and this is in quote, how anyone could call it a crime to send a delegation to the headquarters of the empire. What sort of king have we that we should never go to see him? Unquote. Very interesting that indeed in the ANC debates have always been there. As you can see, this was a serious matter, and the debates were serious about the land issue. Another historically trying period for the movement and the leadership at the time was the outbreak of the First World War. Like virtually all the movements in British and French governed colonies, the ANC leadership believed that a demonstration of loyalty to the imperial government would be repaid by a more sympathetic hearing of their grievances when the war ended. Shortly after the deputations returned home from protesting against the Land Act in London, the First World War broke out in August 1914. The ANC resolved that the war must be supported due to the belief that the loyalty would be rewarded with concessions. The ANC leadership resolved to put all public agitation against the Natives Land Act on hold until after the war, and mobilized people to join the war effort. The noble and patriotic gesture of participating in the war as soldiers was rebuffed by the regime. General Smuts, then defense minister, arrogantly said no Africans would be trained as soldiers or armed with modern weapons, but could enlist in a native labor corps to undertake the digging of trenches, ambulances due to ambulances duty and other manual work, not to be soldiers and fight. Comrades and compatriots, you recall that many African volunteers died in parts of Europe during the war. We are still trying to locate them in France and other parts of Europe so that they can be correctly acknowledged. The biggest tragedy was the sinking of the SS Mendi ship on the 21st February 1917, killing more than 600 black volunteer soldiers. This was indeed a most painful period. It reminds us of the fact that our freedom was not free. It came at a huge price. Our people went through untold humiliation and loss of dignity and freedom for centuries before they could walk as free men and women after casting their votes on the 27th April 1994. Comrades and compatriots, when the First World War ended, the ANC realized that the tactical decision to suspend protest action during the war had been ill-advised. The white regime was going ahead with implementing racist and oppressive laws. The eviction of people from their land as a result of the Natives Land Act was continuing. Pain and suffering continued. The foundation of the system that was later called apartheid was being laid down by the Botha Smuts government around the period of First World War. The country was systematically moving towards a segregationist direction in which whites and blacks would be governed by different norms, standards, and laws. Other than the Land Act, the regime passed many other laws, such as the notorious Natives Urban Areas Act of 1923, which statutorily defined all Africans in the urban areas, temporary sojourners, who were admitted to the cities and towns to minister the needs of the whites. In addition, the Native Administration Act established an entire separate body of laws and procedures for governing the Africans. Compatriots, we would like to single out for praise the ANC Women's League, then called the Bantu Women's League, and its president, Charlotte Mccarthy, for the tireless national campaigns against past laws, starting as early as 1913 in the Free State. The ANC waged campaigns against the past laws, taking its cue from the Women's League, which had started earlier. Indeed, the centenary of the ANC and the lectures of our former president provide an opportunity to remember and appreciate the hard-won freedom we enjoy today. Our freedom came at a huge price. Our forebears sacrificed a lot so that we can today live in peace and dignity in a free, non-racial, democratic South Africa. Comrades and friends, on this special occasion, we are pleased to highlight a few of the many achievements that summarize President Makgatho's legacy. Firstly, President Makgatho revitalized the ANC, taking it beyond deputations to active protest action. The deputations were taking the organization nowhere, and the oppression was intensifying. Described as an urban president, as he worked around Johannesburg and Pretoria mainly, he mobilized the African urban working class, which made the ANC militant and responsive. It was he mainly, with the Transvaal branch, who championed the ANC's radical shift. His deputy, Saul Plaatje, had indicated that They wanted a much more virile and representative organization at the beginning of their term in 1917. The organization adopted new methods, riding on the wave of the impact made through the joint activism with labor, as shown by numerous strikes, as well as against the passes. The leadership threw its support behind the African municipal workers during the bucket strike in 1918 and a second wave of strikes, this time affecting workers on the mines in 1920, to name but a few. Secondly, it can be safely argued that President Makgatho laid the seeds of the Congress Alliance and Tripartite Alliance. It was during his presidency that the Industrial Commercial Workers Union, ICU, was established in 1919, and workers' struggles were prioritized by the ANC. He was also willing to seek alliances with white radical movements such as the International Socialist League to advance the struggle for freedom. Thirdly, an outstanding achievement of President Makgatho's presidency organizationally is that the ANC finalized its constitution in 1919. There was thus a framework within which to operate, as well as procedures for the membership to follow. The Constitution was aimed at addressing a number of issues, primary amongst them being the unity of the African people in the 4 republics. In addition to language differences, the reality is that before 1910, the African communities were governed by very different white regimes in the 4 republics, which also meant that their political experience differed to some degree. Fourthly, President Makgatho achieved phenomenal growth in the ANC. The ANC grew its membership to a paid-up membership of 3,000. It was not an easy achievement those days. He would be very happy to hear that his organization has grown to more than 1 million members today. He grew the ANC despite challenges such as lack of funds and other logistical difficulties. Fifthly, the ANC's human rights tradition has its roots in the historic 1923 Bill of Rights, which emphasized the rights to equal citizenship, access to land, equality before the law, as well as equal representation. The 1923 Congress adopted the Bill of Rights, which formed part of the Constitution. We boast of a Bill of Rights today in our Constitution. We have to thank our forebears who had such remarkable foresight to know that a progressive South Africa will need a Bill of Rights. More importantly, President Makgatho always emphasized the need to build a better Africa. We recall the words in a petition sent to King George dated 16 December 1918, where he raised sharply the ANC's displeasure at how Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland were treated. He said on behalf of the organization, I quote, "We desire to appraise Your Majesty of the fact that when the protectorates called Botswana, Swaziland, and Basotholand sought protection of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, they never surrendered their tribal land and their sovereign rights. They remain this day integral, independent nations. Particularly the independence of Swaziland was recognized under the London Convention of 1884 in the Transvaal. They were never conquered, and they never at any time waived or surrendered their sovereign rights." Unquote. We learn from this direction that the ANC must never abandon its responsibility to the continent. That is why we continue to this day to advance the African agenda in memory of President Makgatho. And all founding fathers and mothers of the movement who demonstrated that this should be done. Also important to learn from President Makgatho's legacy is the need to remain rooted in our communities and to respond to broader social challenges in whatever capacity we hold. Through them as our leaders, and him in particular, though he was based in the urban areas, President Makgatho never forgot his roots in Gampatlele and built a school and a church in the area. A deeper analysis of most ANC leaders in the 20th century reveals individuals rooted in their communities. They never allowed their education to barricade and separate them from the rest of the community. President Makgatho stepped down in 1924 as President General, but continued to lead the Transvaal ANC branch of the ANC until 1933. He returned to the National Executive as Treasurer during the presidency of Plixi Kaizaga Seme in 1930, an indication of his dedication to the African National Congress. President Makgatho lived with his wife Priscilla in Eastwood, Pretoria, until he passed away at the age of 90 in May 1951. We are happy that finally today we are able to share his remarkable story of patriotism, dedication, and selflessness, and his undying quest for freedom, justice, and human rights for all. It fills us with pride to be able to name the Presidential Guest House in Pretoria as the S.M. Makgatho Presidential Guest House in his honor. We hold in high-level international and domestic summits and meetings in the State House. It is used for very important gatherings. It will therefore fit that it is called after this leader and hero of our country. Each time we do so, we will remember this great man who loved this country and his people and wanted only the best for Africa and the world. President Makgatho made a pledge in 1919 that we must continue to implement in his honor and in his memory. He said, and I quote, "We pledge ourselves to continue this lifelong struggle for a South Africa that is legitimate, non-racial, non-exploitative, free, independent, democratic, and playing its proper role amongst the nations of the world," unquote. Indeed, we continue to strive towards this goal, the goal that was set by our leader. Long live the spirit of President Sefako Makgatho. And I would like to thank you for coming here to listen to this lecture. And of course, the way of listening is in many ways. We also acknowledge those who listened differently. But certainly, they describe themselves who they are. The ANC in its long history, it has come across such situations. But inevitably, it is always overcome because it stands for the truth, for the aspirations of our people, It stands for the freedom of our people. It stands for respect of our people. Its leaders, young and old, have always respected this organization and its functions. But of course, the ANC always learns. It never stopped learning about its own people and those who call themselves its own people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.